Stephanie Ryan, thank you so much for being part of our programming. What I'm going to be doing is including you as an episode of our Food for Thought program that we have on our social media. What we do here at the Learn and Grow Educational Series, I shared our information with you before, so I know you know what we're doing. But I thought maybe you could, for our audience, describe what it is that you do and how it relates to science and STEM and those kinds of things.
Yeah, so in my day job, I write curricular materials and assessment materials. And I do that for K through, let's say, 16 to include college. And I really try to write for formative assessment so that if something is missed, it's not just, oh, gotcha, you didn't get it. It's more of, oh, you didn't understand this part. Here, let's give you this experiment to work on. And that's how I really try to focus everything I do in my work. But during the pandemic, I released a book, and it's a children's book called Let's Learn About Chemistry that spawned the Let's Learn About Science social media groups. And there I help parents feel more empowered to do science with their kids by showing them how easy it is. That I just grabbed these 3 things from my kitchen, and this is what you can teach with it. And I try to highlight mistakes when I can, the types of questions that someone might ask, because a lot of parents have had a bad experience with science, and I want to help fix that.
That is so very cool. I mean, that's very much in alignment with, we're doing a very niche-y part of STEM. I mean, we're tackling a specific issue, but the way that we're doing it and the evidence-based practices that we're using are very much in alignment with what you're doing as well. So that's very cool to see. You know, I loved seeing my colleagues in the field out there doing similar kinds of things and coming at the issues from different directions. So very cool, very exciting. Yeah, you know, and that's something you said that resonates with me, is the ease. That when people finally realize how easy it is, and they were like way intimidated by fear of the unknown, so much as the task itself. And once they actually do it, they're like, oh, you mean that's it? And you're like, yeah, I've been trying to tell you.
I fell into that as well. So during the pandemic, we kept my pre-K aged child home so that we could have our grandparents over all summer. And it ended up being 15 months, which is not what I had planned. And right. I, at first, was really overwhelmed because I may have a lot of training in education and chemistry and other sciences. I did not have training in little kids. And I called his preschool teacher and I said, am I doing this right? You know, and she was like, you had him help you cook. You had him help you in the garden. She's like, these are all things that are even better than preschool. And she said, what you're thinking of is you're thinking too hard. You are looking at it from your perspective, and you should be looking at it from his. And I sat with that for a while, and I thought, man, if I was having trouble with that, then people who didn't go to school for education probably would too. And so I started to think, like, how can we simplify things and highlight that they need to be simplified? So when a lot of us think of STEM at home, we think fancy chemistry sets and stuff like that. And it doesn't have to be. And when you think of math, you might not think pattern making. And pattern making could be an art project, you know? And it's just like all these things that you may already do with your kids.
Right,
just
exactly.
Tie it into science and math a little easier. So I wasn't intending on going the parent route until I myself was a parent that was like, wow, I needed a reminder.
Well, you know, and the whole point of the Common Core is to use math and science to solve real world problems in language arts. And that's exactly what you're doing. The whole point of it is to become applied, not just theoretical in a classroom. So when you're actually taking the skills that are necessary that are being taught in the classroom and using them in the real life context, that gives them a lot more meaningful value to the learner than just some hypothetical on a worksheet in a classroom somewhere, you know, and that whole aspect of project-based learning and hands-on learning.
Yeah, and it definitely made it more accessible. So during the pandemic, I worked on a college level textbook, and we were talking about how the labs, how can we do that at home? And I said, you know, as much as we don't like to say this, you can teach stoichiometry with baking soda and vinegar. It doesn't have to be any of these other things we're showing them. We're showing them other things because they do have value, and it is added value. And maybe there's something that has a better color change to show that a reaction has happened. But you could do this at home, and it's with cheap materials that people who don't have the means would be easy to supply them with if you had extra. And it's just something that makes it for everybody instead of just the people who can pay to go to school to then go to a lab. And that was something that I found during the pandemic that really helped with that too. And if it's not something you have to get anything extra for, you feel more comfortable with it because you cook with baking soda, you use vinegar in the kitchen, and it's like, oh, cool.
Familiar. It's familiar. It's not some scary unknown. And what you're making me think of, and this is one of the things that I really, when I created Learn and Grow, it was actually my final semester of grad school because I went back in my 40s and got my master's degree in ed psych. And we had to create an instructional product. And I'm like, the thing I dig about the self-watering containers is not just the water conservation and all the science behind that, which is a lesson planning beyond just about that, but there's the whole self-regulating nature of how they work, and the capillary action, and the gravity is going to pull the excess water back out of the container down to the reservoir. But capillary action is going to pull water back up into the soil and fill those air pockets, and the water molecules are going to be attracted to each other. And as the roots suck moisture out of the soil, it's going to create even more of a draw. And you can't overwater or underwater when you've got the soil regulating itself. And just the very natural aspect of that, that's just a function of nature. And it's just dirt and water. And
think of all the topics you can teach.
We have so many lesson plans on our website. I actually been waiting for a community gardening opportunity where I could do my 5th grade lesson plan. So that one's now finally in the works because we just put in our first community garden at a local school. But I have everything else, K through 12, tied to the Common Core and STEM, and every Boy Scout badge I could think of that could tie into all of this, I have content for. And I'm in the process of seeing if I can't become a sustainability counselor for Boy Scouts, because we also do the sustainable living stuff, and that's, everything behind me is that part of it as well, but the water recapturing and the water conservation and all of that. And so we're looking at these real life applications. Just what can you already do with what you've already got? I mean, just what can you MacGyver? And, a lot of our content is us figuring out how, look what we figured out, like with the tent behind me. In the summertime, it's like a greenhouse in there, even with the sun sail, and it gets over 100 degrees just because the sun, and it's waterproof, so the heat can't escape. But we took Mylar bubble wrap insulation and cut it into panels shaped just like the panels in the thing, and then Velcroed them up so that when we have to take the tent down, we just peel those off. It'll roll up in the bag, same as always, but we still have insulation on the inside that blocks that heat from coming in the summertime, and then holds the heat in from the wood burning stove or a space heater, electric space heater in the wintertime. And all of the science behind that, and just, we had to, what do we need to make happen? And what's affordable and easy to make that come to be without causing a big hairy mess that we're going to have to deal with later. And that whole thinking it all through and being able to model that, you've got the whole Vygotskian thing of modeling, and then the more knowledgeable other and the scaffolding. But then you've also got Piaget and constructivists, where you're like, okay, I've led you to the water. It's now time for you to figure out how to drink, and step back and see what they come up with. And that's been a joy to see too with, the students that we have doing our in-person classes, because I don't get to really see that when people just copy what we do online and post pictures after the fact. But
yeah. In your description, I heard at least 4 MGS standards off the top of my head that you could do with that. And that's one of the things that I tried to point out to parents is that, so like, let's say your kid loves gardening. You could teach your kid anything pre-K through grade 5 with just gardening. You really could. There are resources online on Teacher Pay Teachers that teach the alphabet that way, with that as a context. There's just so many things, and you could do storytelling with the life cycle of a plant. And so you can use your child's interest and just tie as much as you can to that. And it's not what you thought they like, it's what they like. And so after 15 months of doing it this way, my son now knows that he can say, hey, mommy, can we learn about this week? And I'll usually say, maybe not this week. I need a little time to pull it together. So I try to make those lists for parents so that, hey, if your kid says they're like obsessed with the human body and learning about bones and organs, here are some resources, because not all STEM resources are equal.
I remember my daughter in 5th grade struggling with the concept of tectonic plates, and me illustrating it to her with 2 slices of bread on a plate floating on a pool of ketchup. And she was like, "You mean that's it?" I'm like, "Yeah." And
it just helped so much.
It just took that 3D model for her to get it. And she was like, "Oh my gosh." And that took me like all of what, like, 50 cents worth of groceries to explain that concept. I mean.
The phases in the moon with Oreos. We did that one with my son. And he actually, so I know that one can go either way. Like sometimes it's just a demonstration for demonstration's sake. It actually resonated with him that one gets bigger and one gets smaller, and it helped him remember which one was which. And I was like, he goes, "I could actually just like take this one and scrape more out." And I'm like, yes, that is how that works. And so that really helped him. So yeah, I tried to go through and do things like that to help parents see that connection, that this isn't just like, hey, here's a book of facts. Like I learned it when I was a kid. It's more of, look, this is like around us.
Yeah. Oh no. And I remember, because this is telling me, but I grew up, my elementary years were in the late 70s, and I went into middle school, well, junior high is what we called it back then, in 1980. And this was in the deep South, and so it was progressive for its time and its place in terms of the science that we did. But to say that we had all the resources to make all of it make sense to everybody, no. There were certain classes that, were just, beyond most of the others. So the students, you had to really be, we didn't have AP honors or anything like that I can recall. Like what we have out here in California now, but I'm sure there was something. We had a lot of classes that were for the kids who were never going to figure any of that stuff out, and it was very much more practical kinds of things. And I always thought, well, this just makes more sense. I mean, you can go and learn all that hypothetical stuff to pass a test, but I actually know what to do to solve a problem doing all these other things, because it was more of applied, related to what people know kind of a thing. And that just to me made more sense in general. And I think we're, now with the way things have swung full circle, and now you have this applied nature to the Common Core and STEM. What I see are teachers who were brought up in the system that I was brought up in, who are having a hard time making that leap from the old school of teaching, the old style, and actually teaching for meaningful understanding and applied problem solving.
One of the things that I struggled with that was that that they could be wrong for a few days with MGSS. Like, you want them to be wrong for a few days. They build that themselves and they build their mental model. And as a parent, I bite my tongue all the time when I want to correct my son. Like one day he said that he thought that you needed to put ice cubes or water into the oven to make ice cubes. And I was like, no, then I stopped. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to say it. I'm going to let you figure it out on your own. We're going to test this out. We'll get there. And he did. He gets there. And it's like you get there in the end. And we're just not used to that. And so that's something that I really try to let parents know as well, that like it may take all of your being to not correct them, but I promise you it's worth it, because they then believe in their own thoughts and they build their own models. And it's just so much better for them to do it that way.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to facilitate them figuring it out for themselves, not spoon feed them answers that they just regurgitate from rote.
Or to learn with them.
Right.
To show that it's lifelong learning, that like I don't just go to school until 12th grade and then I'm done. It's like every day you learn. Like you see something outside and you're like, I don't know about that. Let's Google that. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm curious by nature that way anyhow, but I for other people it's either they've unlearned that curiosity, that their behaviors have been shaped away from it just because of the culture they live in. And the conditions they're living in, or it just never occurred to them to be curious about stuff, and they have to be prompted to think that way. But
or they don't want to admit
once you
they're
get them
wrong.
Inspired and engaged, you're like, oh, hey, wait a minute, that's cool, and then they're off and running, and so I like to see those light bulb moments happen with people when they they realize they were missing something, and all of a sudden it dawns on them, and they're like now enthused about this, these things that we're trying to open their minds to. So
yeah,
I'm sure you've seen success with the families you've worked with. What kind of feedback have you been getting from the folks who are working with your stuff?
I get comments and messages back that, oh wow, I never even thought to try that, or oh wow, how does that work, or what kind of questions would you ask? Because I'm a little afraid to ask this question. Like, I never would have thought to ask what's inside the bubble. And to me, I'm like, why not? But then I'm like, well, maybe you didn't think of it the same way I did. But I've heard that it really helps them, because what I encourage parents to do is use in their daily observations, use what are you observing? Like, ask the child what they see. Is it a solid, a liquid, or a gas? Has it changed? And can it ever be changed back to what it was before? And if you focus on those very small, easy things to do as a parent, you can actually look at chemical changes, physical changes, that they look at a system. You can have evidence with your reasoning. Like, you can have all these things if you're working, just look at that basic level. And I've heard parents say that their kids start talking about solids and liquids around them. And I'm like, good, because that's so important.
They're incorporating it and applying it, and it makes sense. It's describing the world around them. And you're making me think about a lot of Piagetian concepts like conservation and things like that. But there's a whole thing with, in the world of troubles we're having right now, with people having a hard time relating to each other, and sometimes more relating to each other lately than not, but that the ability to look at the world through somebody else's eyes is a learned skill. It's a developmental milestone. It's something that you have to rehearse and develop, as you're evolving as a human being. And not everybody gets an equal opportunity to work on those skills. And I know I see it a lot when I'm working with kids who are on the autism spectrum, because they naturally struggle with this. And it seems to start at that point in early child development, like around 6, 7 years old, where typically developing children will do joint attention activities, where you're looking at something and somebody else is looking at it, and you're discussing it, trying to figure out what it is. Like, you're walking on the beach and you pick up a seashell and you're looking at it together and you're talking about it. And it's in those moments when you realize, oh, hey, this other person was thinking something entirely different from what I was thinking. And it starts to dawn on you that other people have other thoughts and feelings than what you're thinking and feeling. And you start to get away from that egocentric thought, and you start to engage in perspective taking. And I think what you're describing is, for a lot of parents, they forget that their kids are thinking different things than they are. And it's like a fact check. It brings them back to that moment where they're doing this joint attention activity, and they're talking about this object in common, and they're each sharing their ideas. And it's like, oh my gosh, I would have never even thought to look at it that way. And those out of the mouths of babes moments kind of happen. And I think that's what you're kind of describing. That's what it makes me think of.
Funny, because I actually just referenced that work in a conversation with my husband about how small kids can't look at a mountain and say what the other side of the mountain looks like.
Right, perspective.
People who are more grown can. But I was saying that I wondered if the reason we're having such trouble with perspective taking right now in our time is our individualism, our focus on being an individual in the U.S. compared to other places. It's
promoted egocentric thought, which is to a pathological, unhealthy degree, in my opinion, in some circumstances. And I think what I'm seeing is a schism, if you want to get really Piagetian about it, is a schism between cognitive development and social emotional development, where in communication, where you have people who have intact cognition and communication skills, and therefore can go out and get a job and a credit card. But then that gives them the ability to finance some pretty childishly motivated, emotionally driven decisions. And so it's created a mental health crisis in this country, and it's induced. And then that gets me all the way over to Yuri Bronfenbrenner and his whole thing about how human beings are the only species we know of that is capable of shaping its own environments in order to enhance its own development. And it's an egregious breach of ethics if we don't. We know how to, therefore we should. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, it's like those kinds of things, keep popping up in my head from, all my research and working in the scholarly aspect of all of this. I'm like, oh man, and he was a Russian expatriate who came to the United States. And so, pearls of wisdom from the past. He's probably spinning in his grave right now. But I mean, I think that the more kinds of things that like you and I are doing, where we're doing the work, we're not going to belabor ourselves with the politics of it. We're just doing the work of making sure that everybody has the information they need to think for themselves. And that's what greases the wheels of democracy right there, is knowledge. And
that is one of the reasons I wrote my book the way I did. Was I wrote it so it asked the question, it had a comparison, and there are multiple right answers. So the kids could say, like, all these things are red. Cool, that is, you're right. And you provided evidence that was factual, and you've got that. But look, this kid also said something that's right. Like, let's look at that. And so I actually looked at the SEPs for the NGSS of like, what does it take to be a scientist? And like, what are these practices we do? How can we encourage that in younger children with their parents so that the skill is just like cultivated in them? I love that, because kids you don't want them to just say, oh, I think it's red. Why? Well, I just think so. Like, yeah, right. Why do you think that? And so I don't want it just to be the kids of scientists who do that, because everybody should do that. We should be able to watch a commercial that has a whole bunch of hocus pocus in it of where they're trying to sell you something. You should be able to say, wait, that doesn't make sense. And the study they're referencing is the study they did.
I do that all the time. That's why I get so fed up with watching stuff like that, being a passive recipient of content, because I'm like, no, click. It's like, I'm right there with you on that one. Yeah, that's a really good point.
There's a really cool series on Instagram right now by, I don't know if you follow the Dad Lab. He started looking at TikTok videos that are going viral about science that are bunk, but they look real because they have special effects. And so he actually picks it apart and is like, so you think this is real? Here's what they did. And he shows you how they cut the video. I love that.
That kind of stuff will become even more viral than the bogus stuff, because people like seeing that stuff exposed. Is everybody's about a reveal, Everybody's about a reveal. Cool. Well, this has been really exciting to talk to you about these kinds of things. I think that, you and I are tackling similar issues from different angles, but very much complementing each other's work. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about all of this stuff. Is there anything else you can think of that you would want the Learn and Grow audience to know about what it is you're doing and where they can find more about your work and what you do?
I would say the thing I would like to leave everybody with is that science is all around us all the time. And so is math. Math is everywhere. Even at the simple level of just finding a pattern, recognizing a pattern, you can find patterns in your food. And we actually have activities using food. And so you can do this no matter who you are. And you can encourage this in others as well. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are people out there who have all this kind of content online like us. And it's something that we're here to help. And we really, really want you to have fun with it. And we want science to be as magical to kids as it is to adults. Like, you want it to stay.
Yeah, there's a wow factor there. And when you experience it, it becomes kind of addictive. You get kind of hooked on it once you're engaged. And parents shouldn't be intimidated by that at all.
Definitely not. Inspired.
Yeah, it's fun and it's easy. I'll close with this. I remember my daughter being in a preschool kindergarten where they would do the thing where you put cornstarch in water and it has that surface tension. And it's like, we could not get the dads out of that bin. They would play it at open house nights. The dads would be over there playing with that stuff. And we're like, dude, we're talking about grown-up things over here. And they're like, wee. So, it is fun, and parents need to embrace the fun aspect of it and realize that science and math are everything.
And you can incorporate your own interests as well. I have conversations with dads specifically about this because sometimes they have trouble thinking of like, how can I get in with that? That feels more like the mom thing to do, which is funny because science is usually seen as the male thing.
Male dominated, yeah.
But in terms of interests, so like this one guy I was talking to was talking about fixing things. Like, you could very much include your child in that, get them their own little tool set and give them a smaller problem to work on. And that's them solving a problem, which is a science skill. And so or go to a museum that has something you both like. But let them interact with it in the way they want to, not the way you want them to.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for this. This was enjoyable, and I know that our folks, they're going to find it informational as well. So I'm going to go ahead and close for now, but thanks so much for doing this with me, and I'm really excited to see all the other stuff that you're going to do and looking at your book.
Thanks.